The function call statement contains a name of the function and the list of arguments. Whatever the arguments or variables I'm going to have in my function headers are called arguments. The scope of the variable is going to start when and where we declare the variables. Hello to all, a warm welcome to my new session on user-defined function. I'm Revati, faculty, Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. Before going to start my today's session, let me to recall the things what I have discussed in my last session of this chapter. So, last session of this chapter, I started with introduction about the user-defined function. So, what is user-defined function? Users are responsible for writing their own programs to perform certain tasks. It is called user-defined function. For example, think that I'm the user and I want to perform my own task. For that, I'm going to write the program as called user-defined function. Then I have explained the advantages of user-defined function. Along with that, I have covered functions definition or structure of function. That means how I can able to write the function in my program. There is nothing but the user defined function. What are the rules I need to follow while defining function? Along with that, I have covered calling a function. How can I make a function call in my program? And what is main function? And what is the need of main function? Along with that, returning a value. Along with that, I have covered function prototype. So dear student, these are the topics I have covered in my last session of this chapter. But today I'm going to deal with types of arguments. So here arguments are nothing but the variables, and what are the different kinds of variables I'm going to have, that one I'm going to discuss in my today's session. So here totally we are going to have 4 different types of arguments or variables. At the beginning, I'm going to cover actual arguments, then I'm going to cover formal arguments or formal parameters, then I'm going to cover local variables as well as global variables. Along with that, I'm going to deal with the scope of the variables. Along with that, I'm going to deal with the different kinds of user defined functions we can able to write in our program. These are the certain topics I'm going to deal with today's session. So dear students, let's move on to the today's very interesting topic, types of arguments. So what is argument? It's nothing but the variable, and the arguments are classified into 4 types. So a variable is a function header is called as arguments. Variables I'm going to use in my function headers are called arguments. Now tell me, what is function header? So the function header includes return type, then function name along with the arguments. So whatever the arguments or variables I'm going to have in my function headers are called arguments. For example, if I'm having int a, float b, These are the example for arguments where I can able to find the arguments in my function header. So the arguments are used to pass the information. Suppose if I want to pass the information from the calling function to called function, then I'm going to use the arguments. So here think that I'm going to have the add function and I'm going to pass the values, that is 10 and 20, to the called function. Okay, this is nothing but the arguments. So here, when I call this add function, along with that, I'm going to pass the 10 and 20. Now, this 10 and 20s are held by the A and B. So here, A and B are the arguments. And these arguments are classified into 4 different types. First one is actual argument. So what is actual argument and where it is being used? So dear student, remember here that when I call the function and whatever the argument I'm going to pass during my function call is called actual argument. So the function call statement contains a name of the function and the list of arguments. So dear student, how I'm going to make a call here with the help of function. For example, this is user defined function. So what is the name here? It is add. And if I pass A comma B, so these are the actual argument. So dear student, what I want to remember here, that whatever the argument I'm going to use in my function calls are called actual argument, and these arguments or parameters are called actual parameters. I can able to use the word variable or I can able to use the word arguments, and these arguments are called actual parameter. The argument can be constants, variables as well as expression. So whatever the argument I'm going to pass here, that may be a constant value or that may be a variable and that may be an expression. So this is the example I'm going to have. So here biggest is the function name. So this is the example for user defined function, and it's going to hold 3 actual parameters, that is A, B and C. And after execution of this function, whatever the result I'm going to get, that is stored in this big variable. Moving further, I'm going to have formal arguments. So dear student, just remember one thing, when I'm going to say actual variables, just remember function call as well as variables. Then what about formal parameters? So here it's nothing but your function definition. Whatever the parameters I'm going to use my function definition are called formal parameters. So here the function header contains return type specifier, functions as well as list of arguments and its declaration. As I told, function header or function prototype includes return type, along with that function name and list of parameters, and whatever the parameters I'm going to use in my function prototypes are the example for formal parameter. These arguments are called as formal arguments or dummy arguments. The formal arguments gets their value from the actual argument. So whatever the argument I'm going to use in my function prototypes are called dummy argument. So why it is called dummy argument? Because it is going to receive the argument from the actual argument. That means it is going to receive the values or arguments from the function call. For that reason, it is called dummy arguments or empty arguments. And this is the example I'm going to have here. So here int is nothing but the return type, and biggest is my function name, and it's going to have 3 formal parameters, and x, y and z are the example for formal parameters. Moving further, I'm going to have local variable. So what is local? That is local to certain region or certain block. Now, the variables declared inside the function or block is said to be local variable. So whatever the variable I'm going to define and use in certain blocks are called the local variables. The best example here I can consider myself. So here I'm going to take my class inside the classroom. So whatever the class I'm going to take, that is applicable throughout this class. This kind of variables are called local variable. So values of local variables are accessible only in the block. For example, think that I'm having add function and here I'm having some local variable. Then what's the scope of this local variable within this block? That means I can able to access all the local variables within the block. The functions formal arguments also called local variables. That means whatever the formal arguments I'm having in my function prototypes are also example for local variables. That means the formal variables are accessible only throughout that block or only throughout that function. So this is the example I'm having. So here I'm going to specify the function name. For example, I'll write add. This is the user defined function. Now it's going to have 2 formal arguments, that is a and b. And here inside this function I'm having 2 local variables, that is x and y. Now, these are the example for local variables, and whatever the formal variables I'm having in my function, that is a and b, are also example for local variable. Moving further, I'm going to have the global variable. So what is global variable? Now, the variable declared outside the function. Whatever the variable I'm going to have, I'm going to declare that variable outside the class or outside the functions are called global variables. Now think that in our corridor, we are having 4 different classes. Now think that I'm going to stand in the corridor and I'm going to take the class so that all 4 class students are able to listen my class. This is the example for global variable. That means globally I'm going to deliver my lecturing. So here global variables are nothing but the variables. Now these variables are declared above the function and those variables are called global variables. So these variables are referred by the same data type and same name throughout the program, and calling function and called function. That means If I write the variables above the main function, now this variable A and B are accessible throughout the program. That means I can able to access A and B in my main program as well as in my sub program. So it is globally available throughout the program. Whenever if some variables are treated as same values in both main program as well as my function, in that time I can able to use global variable. For example, think that I want to specify the pi value, that is 3.1214. Now I want to use this pi in my main program as well as in my sub program. So it is globally applicable throughout the program. In that time, what I will do, I'm going to make this pi as my global variable. That means I'm going to declare this pi above the main function so that all the functions as well as sub programs can able to access pi value. The example here is, here I have written int a comma b. Now this a and b are the example for global variables and where I am going to declare above the main function. Now I can able to use these variables in my main program as well as in my sub program. This is the way I can able to use global variables. So here arguments or variables are classified into 4 types. Actual argument, there is nothing but arguments used in the function call. Then formal arguments, that is arguments used in the function prototype. Then local variables, that means variables which is used and declared in the function. And what about global variables? Globally accessible by the main program as well as sub program. Dear student, let me to write simple program here. Before going to write simple program, let me to recall the things what I have discussed in my previous session. So when I talk about user-defined function, that includes 3 parts. One is function prototype, next function call, then I'm going to have the function definition. So dear student, just remember one thing, that I can able to write the function definition above the main program or below the main program. If I'm going to write the function definition above the main program, then no need to specify the function prototype. And if I'm going to write the function definition below the main program, then I need to write the function prototype. Let me to include the header file at the beginning. So hash include IO stream dot h, then I will include conio dot h. Now think that I'm going to write the main program. That means I'm going to write the function definition below the main program. So at the beginning, I need to specify the function prototype. As we know, first I need to write the user-defined function name. For example, say it is fact. Now I want to specify the arguments. For example, I'll write int n. Now I want to specify the data type. For example, say it is integer. Now I'll take one more variable called m, and it's of type integer. Now I want to display the message to the user that enter the n value. That means enter the number range. Enter the number range. Now Cin and m. Now I will take one more a variable called out, and I'm going to call the function that is fact, and I'm going to send the value m. So this is my calling function. Calling function. Now I'll write get, I'll write cout factorial of a given number, then I'll write out. Now I'm going to write the get ch, and I'm going to close the main function. So I'm going to consider this one. What is the return type I'm having here? It is integer. So I'll write int as it is. And what is my function name? It is fact. And what is my argument? It is int n. So dear student, just see the difference here. In my function prototype, I'm going to place the semicolon at the end. But if I'm writing function definition, here itself I'm going to write the body of the function. So no need to place the semicolon at the end. And one more thing, we have to remember here that all the function names must be same. So here I cannot write fact1, here fact 1. It is wrong because calling function, called function name must be same. So I'm going to declare local variable called I. Now I'll write the for loop for I equal to 0, semicolon I less than n, semicolon I plus plus. And dear student, what's the program? I need to find the factorial of a given number. And if I multiply any number with the value 0, I'm going to get the value 0. So instead of 0, what I will do? I'll write 1. Now what I will do? I'm going to take one more variable called f, and I'm going to assign the value 1. Now I'm going to find the factorial of a given number. For example, if my n is 3, this for loop is going to execute 3 times. For example, it is 3 factorial. So I need to get 3 into 2 into 1. So dear student, let me to trace this example. So here I is 1. Then I less than or equal to n, I plus plus. So initially what is f? F is 1. And what about I? I is 1. So 1 less than 3, it is true. So 1 into 1, f is 1 now. Now I is incremented by 1. Now I is 2. 2 less than or equal to 3, the condition is true. So 1 into 2, it is 2. Now I is incremented by 1. Now I is 3. 3 less than or equal to 3. The condition is true. So I'm going to get the value 6. Now I is incremented by 1. I is 4. 4 less than or equal to 3. The condition is failed. So the control directly transferred into return of f. That means I'm going to return the value 6 to the main program. So I'm going to get the value 6. This is the way I can able to create user-defined functions in my program. So while creating user-defined functions, I need to follow 3 points. That is, at the beginning, I'm going to have the prototype, then I'm going to have the function call, along with I'm going to have the function definition. Moving further, I'm going to have the scope of the variables. So the scope of the variables refers to the part of the program where the values of the variables can be used. So what is the scope of the variables? That is nothing but the scope of the variables within or without, that is outside the program. So scope of the variables refers to the part of the program. That means which particular variable we can able to use in the main program, which variable we can able to use in the subprogram, etc. And this is called scope of the variables. So the scope of the variables begins from where the variable is declared. So here the scope of the variable is going to start when and where we declare the variables. So if the declaration is inside the function, for example, int add and int c and d. So here variables are declared inside the function. The variables c and d are declared within the or inside the function. So the scope of c and d is within the function. And we can also have innermost block as well as outermost block. So dear student, if I write the variables outside the main program, then the scope of the variable is throughout the program. If I write inside the function, then inside the function we can able to access the variable. And if I write the variables or if I declare the variables within the block, then those variables are accessed within the block. Now moving further, we are going to have the type of function. So dear student, till now I discussed what is function, what is user defined function, what is variable, scope of variables, etc. But now I'm going to deal with the different types of function. So here we are going to have 5 different types of function, that is function with no arguments. The first type is I'm going to have the function, but I'm not going to have any arguments and no return value. So if I use first type, I'm having the function, but it's not going to accept any arguments as well as it won't return any value. Then moving on to the second type, I'm having function with argument. That means I'm having function. Now this function can able to accept the arguments, but it won't return any value. Then moving on to the third type, I'm having function, but I won't accept any argument, but I'm going to return the value. So this is my third type. And moving on to the fourth type, I'm having the function. This function can able to accept arguments as well as it's going to return the value. So this is my fourth type. And moving on to the last type, I'm going to have the recursive function. So recursive function means what? Recursive, repetition. That means I'm going to call same function again and again and again until the given condition is satisfied. So it is recursively I'm going to execute the statements, and this kind of functions are called recursive function. Moving further, at the beginning I'm going to have the first type of function, that is functions with no arguments, no return type. So dear student, remember one thing here, that I'm having the function, but I won't return any value, even I won't accept any value. So this is the general form I'm having. According to the function type name, I'm not going to return any value. So for that reason, the data type here is void. So the return type here is void, and I'm going to have the function name, and this function does not receive or accepts any arguments, and I'm going to have the statement. So in this method, the simply performs independent task. This kind of functions are simply responsible for performing independent task, and this function does not receive any argument, and it does not return any arguments. Moving further, I'm going to have the simple example that I want to find the natural number. So it does not return anything to the other program. So the return value is void. And what is my function name? Natural. And it does not receive any arguments from the calling program. So I want to display the natural number up to 10. So I want to start from 1. After 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. So what I will do, I am going to write the for loop. Now I is 1, 1 less than or equal to 10, condition is true. I am going to print 1. I is incremented by 1, now I is 2, 2 less than or equal to 10, condition is true. Now I am going to print 2, and it's going to vary up to 9 and 10. For example, think that I is 9 now. 9 less than or equal to 10, the condition is true. So I want to print 9. After printing, I is incremented by 1, I is now 10, 10 less than or equal to 10, the condition is true. So what I will do, I'm going to print the value 10. Now I is incremented by 1, now I is 11, 11 less than or equal to 10, the condition is false. So dear student, what you have to note here, so whatever the calculation or whatever the operation I'm going to perform, here itself I'm going to print the value. So here itself I'm going to print the value, and I does not return any values to the other programs. So this kind of function is called function with no return type and no argument. Moving further, I'm going to have the second type of function, that is functions with arguments and no return type. So as the name indicates that I'm going to have the function and I'm capable to receive the argument, but after execution, I won't return any value to the other program. So this is the general syntax I'm going to have. So here void is the return type, function name is nothing but the user defined function name, and I'm going to have the list of arguments, and I'm going to have set of statements. Moving further, I'm going to have the example for this type. So as the syntax at the beginning, it does not return any value, for that reason it is void. Then I want to specify the user defined function name. So what is user defined function name here? That is nothing but the sum, and it's going to receive 3 arguments, that is x, y and z. So these arguments are called formal arguments, and whatever the sum I'm going to have here, that is called local variable or local arguments. Now what I want to do, I want to find the summation of 3 numbers. So after adding 3 numbers, whatever the output I'm going to get, I'm going to store in this sum. Now I'm going to display the output sum. So according to this type, I can able to receive the argument from the calling function, but I cannot able to return the values to the calling function. So what is the return type? Void. That indicates that I'm going to perform all the operation in this function and I'm going to display the output here itself. I don't want to return the values to other function. For that reason, it is void, and user defined function name is here sum, and it's going to take three variables, and these are example for formal variables. So dear student, in my today's session, I started with the type of variables, that is what is actual variable, formal variable, local variable as well as global variable. Along with that, I have covered the different types of functions. In that, a function with arguments and no return type, another one a function without argument and without return type. These are the two type of functions I have covered in my today's session. So dear student, let's meet in the next session with some more information about user defined function. Until then, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.